Shalom, man. Double honors to the elders. Sing honors to the apostles. Preaching and teaching us this word of truth with sincerity as always. So all praises to Yahweh Shemaf Shai. Today's lesson will be edifying. I just want to speak a bit on, to show more a bit on this cannibalism that I talked about last week. A little bit. This will be part 2 to this series here. Yes, this would be part 2 to the series, so I'm going to continue in this video where we were. We spoke on the 1030 to 1033 famine, and some of the accounts that they talked about here was some of the accounts that I remember that I played a bit of last week was about how around that time they had grown-ups that were hungry because of this 1033 famine. This monk, what was his name again? I think I had it here. Yeah, they have it here, the 1030 to 1033 famine. Yeah, he wrote this account. It was a Benedictine monk, Raoul Glaber, or Rodolphus Glaber, however you pronounce it. I got it here on the screen. The dude's name. He lived from 985 to 1047. He said, was a contemporary of the famine, and the information comes from his work titled The 5 Books of Histories. The narrator emphasizes that Glaber had a front row seat to these events while living in monasteries in Burgundy and central France. He recorded these details with horrified attention because he believed the road was tilting toward the end times. The narrator explicitly notes that while some historians argue about the extent of Glaber's embellishment for the sake of the apocalyptic narrative, his accounts, such as the description of the man selling human flesh in a market, are recorded by a man who claimed to have seen the evidence with his own eyes. Con. Yeah. So yeah, it was an account of him luring kids in, how he lured kids into the alleys and dark places, so that so that they can murder them and eat them. If you're interested, you can watch the video. If you're interested, you can watch that video. The video is there somewhere there. You can go find it yourself.
Be killing them. Now, I'll be straight with you about Glaber because historians argue about him and you deserve to know that. Some scholars think he laid it on thick, that a monk writing about the apocalypse was always going to reach for the most horrifying material he could find, and that some of these stories were rumor he repeated as fact. Other historians take him a lot more seriously and think he was a genuine witness to a genuine catastrophe. The honest answer is that we can't verify the 48 heads or the exact price of grain. What we can say is that a man who lived through it believed these things happened, wrote them in detail. Believed these things happened, wrote them in detail, in at least one case claimed to have seen the evidence with his own eyes, and recorded a medical phenomenon so precisely that we can confirm it 8 centuries later. Read it as what a survivor reported, not as a court transcript, and it still does the job. Let me pull us out of Burgundy for a second, because I want to show you the single most credible eyewitness account of famine cannibalism from anywhere near this period, and it doesn't come from Europe at all. It comes from Egypt around the year 1200, and it's written by a physician. His name was Abd al-Latif al-Baghdadi, a scholar and doctor born in Baghdad in 1162. And he happened to be in Cairo when the Nile failed to flood properly 2 years running. For Egypt, the Nile flood was everything. The whole civilization ran on it. Every year the river rose, spread across the fields, left behind the black silt that made Egyptian farmland the envy of the ancient world, and then withdrew. And the crops went in. No flood, no silt, no crops, no food. And the country slid into a famine so total that al-Baghdadi, a trained medical man with a calm and precise way of writing, started recording things he clearly never expected to record. What makes him so valuable is that he's not a monk reaching for the end of the world. He has no apocalypse to prove. He's a doctor describing symptoms, the same way he described the progress of a fever, and his refusal to get emotional about it is exactly what makes it so hard to read. The poor, he writes, ate carrion, corpses, dogs, excrement. And then he writes that they went further than that, so far as to eat little children. He doesn't leave it general either. He says, in the first person, that he himself saw a small child roasted in a basket. He describes the bodies turning up everywhere, in the streets, in the markets, at the gates of the city, so many that the living gave up on burying them. He describes parents being caught with the roasted body of a child and brought before the commander of the city and condemned to be burned alive for it. The same penalty we saw in Burgundy, a continent and a faith apart, the same fire for the same act. He describes finding a corpse that had been stripped of all its flesh for food, its legs tied together like a sheep trussed up for the pot, and the comparison is what does it. A man looking at a dead human being and reaching, automatically, for the way you describe a butchered animal, because that's what had been done to it. And he notices something as a clinician that's almost worse than the horror. It stopped being a last resort. People, he writes, developed such a taste for this that it became ordinary provender to them. Something a body does to survive, repeated enough times, becomes a habit, and the habit outlives the emergency. A doctor noticed that and wrote it down 800 years ago in flat, careful prose, and it's the flatness that makes it land. I bring al-Baghdadi in here, even though Egypt isn't medieval Europe, because he's the control case. When somebody trustworthy, sober, and medically trained sits in the middle of a famine and reports the exact same things the European chroniclers report, the killing of children, the burning of the cannibals, the trussed-up corpse, the taste that becomes a habit, it tells you the European accounts aren't just monks borrowing horror from the Bible. The same catastrophe produces the same human behavior, whether it's a Benedictine in Burgundy or a physician on the Nile. That's the thing about starvation. It doesn't care about your religion or your century. Starting in the spring.
Now it's gonna go to another account, a different famine. But yeah, man, that's, as the guy said there, it doesn't matter their religion or where they're from. As we saw, the first famine happened there near France. This famine is over there in Egypt, the one we just described. And you had the same reactions, the same desperate reactions that the carnal a means of handling the situation that they also had, that both of these accounts had, is they wanted to eat human flesh. So that's all they had was human flesh, so they ate human flesh. So yeah, man, so that's why it's gonna take the spirit to ultimately be able to work around that. The mercy of the Yahweh Shemashai that's going to move within his elect, whoever the elect are. I believe I'm the elect. It's gonna be able to resist to that and not have to resort unto cannibalism. As it says in Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through a Mashiach who strengthens me. Yeah, because it's gonna be a lot of. I would take either a strong person or it's either the spirit to not allow yourself to commit cannibalism, even though there's no more food, there's no more stores and meat or beans or any type of food, because you can't eat grass. You can't eat. Some people were eating leather belts, but that's not even anything of worth to eat. Even if there is nothing else left and you don't eat human cannibalism, but you eat leather belts or grass or herbs, that can only do so much. You still would need water, even more than you would need food. That would only do so much. Fruits, that would only get you so much energy and calories, and it might give you vitamins and it might have some vitamins and minerals, but that can only do so much. You really would need to have a full meal, a full course meal, as they say, to be able to continue to retain your energy. So it would take the spirit to have to really get you through. Because in one case here in Elijah, there was a famine. This is 1 Kings 17, 2-16. I'll start at verse 1. Elijah announces a great drought. Now Elijah the Tishbite from Tishbit in Gilead said to Ahab, "As the Lord, the power of Israel, lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years except at my word." Verse 2, the subheading is, Elijah fed by ravens. Then the word of Yahweh came to Elijah, "Leave here, turn eastward, and hide in the Kereth Rabbin, east of the Jordan. You will drink from the brook, and I have directed the ravens to supply you with food there." Yep, it says in verse 5, so he did what the Lord had told him. He went to the Kereth Rabbin, east of the Jordan, and stayed there. The ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning, and bread and meat in the evening. And he drank from the brook. So right there, in that case, right there, the Lord fed Elijah right there, man. And there's a second time as well how the Lord fed Elijah through this widow and the oil jar that she had that didn't run out. It said here, Elijah, in the subheading says, Elijah and the widow at Sarephath, however you say that. It says verse 7, sometime later the brook dried up because there had been no rain in the land. Then the word of Yahweh came to him, go at once to Sarephath in the region of Sidon and stay there. I have directed a widow there to supply you with food. So he went to Sarephath, and when he came to the town gates, a widow was there gathering sticks. He called to her and asked, would you bring me a little water in a jar so I may have a drink? As she was going to get it, he called it, and bring me please a piece of bread. 12, as surely as the Lord your power lives, she replied, I don't have any bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little olive oil in a jug. I am gathering a few sticks to take home and make a meal for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die. Yeah, because that's how bad the famine was, that there was no more wheat coming in. So the widow had to say, yeah, this is my last meal. I'm taking these sticks to go eat this last meal, basically, she was saying. And then die, because there wasn't any more rain or wheat coming in. Income coming in, right? You need income coming in. It says in verse 13, Elijah said to her, don't be afraid, go home and do as... But you notice what I found interesting as well, you jump up. The Lord told Elijah, I have directed a widow there to supply you with food. So how did the Lord direct the widow if when Elijah came, he asked the widow, and the widow was like, I can't feed you bread. It's my last oil, my last bit of oil and my last bit of bread. I'm gathering these last sticks to go make this last pieces of bread to eat and then die. So how did the Lord direct her if she didn't, if she wasn't gathering those sticks to already have it ready for Elijah? So it just shows you that the Lord directs you in your dreams, in your sleep, once you sleep, through your vibration, through your spirit. And then you wake up in that certain vibration and spirit that leads you to making the next decision you're going to make before you even realize you just made that decision. That's what it means when it says the Lord, when deep sleep falls upon man and he puts their instructions in them, or the Lord decides man's goings are not wait, man's goings are of the Lord. Salaki. Man's goings are of the Lord, yeah. It is not in man to direct his steps. There's a way that seemeth right unto the man, but the Lord directed his steps, basically. You might think you want to go this way, you're going to do this and this and this and get this done this week. But then you don't end up getting all that done, and it's because it was the Lord's will for you not to get all that done. You go in for a job interview, the Lord decides whether you get the job or you don't get the job. The Lord decides everything. He decides a person can eat this much bad food, but he doesn't die from it, because the Lord's still deciding when he's going to die. But if this person ate that amount of bad food, he would probably end up dead, because the Lord decides that. The Lord decides if you're going to fast today or not fast today. The Lord decides if you're going to fall down and bust your face or elbow or knee. The Lord decides. Yesterday I walked down the street and I saw this woman's house that fell. Part of the front pillar of it fell and it hit her car too. The Lord decided that house today was going to fall or not fall down, and it's not, maybe she might not have been the most wickedest woman or person there in that whole neighborhood, but that's the Lord decided that to happen to her. So yeah, and it's not to complain, to say, oh, the Lord is more wicked for allowing that. It's just the fact, it's to prove the point that the Lord is the one who controls. The Lord is the one who decides what happens or what doesn't happen today. So anyway, continuing on in 1 Kings 17, verse 10. So he went to Zarephath. Elijah said, would you bring me a little water? And so she was going to go to get it. And then he said, bring me a piece of bread. And then she said this once again, I don't have any bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little olive oil in a jug. I am gathering a few sticks to take home and make a meal for myself and my son, that we may eat and die. Elijah said to her, don't be afraid, go home and do as you have said. But first make a small loaf of bread for me from what you have and bring it to me. And then make something for yourself and your son, for this is what the Lord, power of Israel, says. And this is how the Lord instructed the widow, how she was going to feed Elijah, how the Lord told Elijah earlier, I instructed this widow to feed you. Yeah, because the Lord, it says, I've directed this widow there to supply you with food. That's how the Lord directed that. Alrighty, so 14. For this is what the Lord says, the power of Israel says, the jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the land. She went away and did as Elijah had told her. So there was food every day for Elijah and for the woman and her family. For the jar of flour was not used up, and the jug of oil did not run dry, in keeping with the word of the Lord spoken by Elijah. Hey, and that's a great miracle right there. And this could happen for a brother or certain brothers, for when that famine comes, man. You may just have oil in your house. You might just have some oil in your house. You might even have some literal flour as well. And the brother might know how to make bread and stuff. You might just be, my Lord just might work it out to where that bread and the flour and the oil doesn't run out for you to continue to make some bread. And then for that water to not run out for you. Or the Lord can also send you a bird, or a raven or even a crow or whatever bird to also feed you in that time to come, man. The Lord can send an eagle to feed you, or the same the exact bird as in the story, a crow or a raven, to come and feed you. Yeah, so I just wanted to bring those two accounts right there. Basically just showing you how the elect was being taken care of in that time. And even with the miracle Yahweh did it with multiplying the bread and the fish that the disciples had. They had only like 7 pieces of fish and 3 pieces of bread, and it was like a crowd of 1,000, I think. And Yahweh Shai was able to multiply the fish. Maybe he grabbed it one by one and from the basket, and they was able to continue to multiply. However Yahweh Shai did it, or maybe he just the basket might have been bigger, and he was able to put his hands or pray over it, and it was even more fish. So the Lord may just do this and accomplish this for certain of the elect. However, whoever, whenever, blah, 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 blah. However the Lord may do this, man, in that time to come. For the elect, once again, man. For the elect. Because I must pull this scripture up. It says in Isaiah 65:13, therefore this is what the sovereign Lord says, my servants will eat, but you will go hungry. My servants will drink, but you will go thirsty. My servants will rejoice, but you will be put to shame. So yeah, man, the Lord's going to lift up a standard and look out for his elect. Oh, and actually there was a third account as well of how Elijah was fed. I almost forgot about it. He was fed by an angel as well, in one account as well. In 1 Kings 19, this was just shortly after the meeting with the widow, and as well as with the being fed by the raven. He was fed by the raven first, then he was being fed by the widow, and then shortly after he was the angel came and fed him as well. So the raven can represent and if I'm not mistaken, I'll look it up here. A raven symbolized wisdom, transformation, and hidden knowledge. Yeah, and Elijah had that hidden knowledge, the hidden knowledge of the Lord, the fear of the Lord. It says the fear of the Lord is his treasure. How does that scripture go again? And wisdom and knowledge shall be the stability of thy times. The fear of the Lord is his treasure. We always used to pull that up. I forgot where it was. I think it's Isaiah 36 at 9. 33 and 6. And wisdom and knowledge shall be the stability of thy times and strength of salvation. The fear of the Lord is his treasure. So that was that hidden knowledge, as the raven represents the hidden knowledge. He was near a brook, a river, which represents the tree of life. This word, this knowledge, this truth. And then he was fed by the widow. The widow in the scriptures, Israel is likened unto a widow as well. The elect is likened unto a widow before they meet Yahweh Shai once again, because the elect has been punished by Yahweh the Father. Yahweh talks about how he's the birthborn Israel. He's left Israel in the book of Ezekiel. And technically we still are in that divorce. It's just the Lord's having a bit more mercy on us, and he still is going to have mercy on us. And I see that. And Russia's definitely still going to get involved, and still is involved as well, inside joke. It says because of their hyper Ravens once again, because of, and then that widow, and then her son can represent Abraham or Isaac, I mean, because Abraham, Rachel, and his woman Rachel, specifically Rachel, was a widow, and then her son Abraham. In the Revelation, Israel is likened unto a woman with her son, pregnant with a son, like a widow with her son there, where Elijah was fed by the widow and her son, which represents the truth, the Israel, the elect. And then you had he was fed by an angel, which the angels represent protection. We'll get that account later. First, I want to get what a raven represents here. They represent intelligence, cunning, survival. Wasn't Elijah surviving? And that's beautiful for the Lord to send a raven to feed you. That's pretty beautiful how that happened. I know in the book of Noah, the Lord sent, I think it was a raven as well, or it could have been a crow. Because ultimately, a raven represents death and kind of like unclean, I think, because it was eating the dead corpses from the flood. That's why it didn't want to go back, and then it just stood on top of whatever mountains or peaks was still there. That's why it didn't come back after Noah sent it out to search to see if the ground was dry enough. If there was any dry ground, it left. It says that they frequently serve as liminal messengers bridging the gap between life, death, and spiritual rebirth. So yeah, Elijah fed by a angel. It says that 1 Kings 19:7-18. And the angel of the Lord came again and the second time and touched him and said, Arise and eat, because the journey is too great for thee. And he arose and did eat and drink and went in the strength of that meat 40 days and 40 nights unto Horeb, the mount of God. So basically, those 40 days, 40 nights were Elijah didn't go hungry at all. That food was able to keep him fed enough to be able to not even want to have to eat. And it's a similar case in the book of Ezra, where Ezra drank the fire that was like water in the mouth, but looked like fire, and that's where he was able to. And that's where the book of Eli gets that all from. And that's where Ezra was able to, he just straight up talked for 40 days, 40 nights. He just kept talking and talking and talking. He just kept speaking the scriptures. And he wasn't even hungry. So that was also him being able to be fed and sustained enough for 40 days, just speaking and speaking. Because it said that he they wrote these books in the span of 40 days, and he neither slept nor ate. He just talked in the night, and in the morning he kept talking. But the ones that were writing down, they sprout in the day, and then in the night they ate their bread. Contrary to what Esau breaks that down. Esau thinks that Ezra was, I don't even remember what Esau said, but AI broke it down incorrectly. Yeah, they wrote that down. They broke that down incorrectly. It was, Ezra wasn't eating or drinking. How was he going to be eating and talking at the same time, or drinking and talking at the same time? That's impossible. You try talking and eating at the same time, or drinking and talking at the same time. That's not going to work out too good. But anyway, continuing on the lesson here in the topic here, this is what it says in this topic. Listen to this. This is 1 Kings 19, verse 9. And he came thither unto a cave and lodged there, and behold, the word of Yahweh came to him, and he said unto him, What doest thou here, Elijah? Yes, so that was the point. That was the point there. And then even the 7,000 that the Lord told Elijah, so basically, and then you also had the 7,000 that were being taken care of as well, that I'm not even mentioning. But going back to this account here, I want to go back to this, play a bit more of this.
Nope. These aren't tomatoes. This is the recipe he makes because his mother used to. By heart, by hand, was shipped and shopped same day in the same way you were. No one is ordinary.
To 1317.
Starting in the spring of 1315, it rained across northern Europe and basically didn't stop. Not a storm, not a bad season, but a sustained wrongness in the weather that ruined harvest after harvest from roughly 1315 through 1317, with the misery dragging on in various forms until about 1322. We're talking about everywhere from Ireland and England across to France, the Low Countries, Germany, Scandinavia, Poland, an entire half of a continent under the same grey sky. The grain rotted in the fields. What did grow came up thin and pale and wouldn't ripen, and the straw was so wet you couldn't even dry it for animal bedding. The salt couldn't be properly produced because the way you made salt was by evaporating seawater in the sun, and the sun wasn't there. So even preserving what little food there was became harder, which meant meat and fish spoiled that should have lasted the winter. Everything that could go wrong with food in a wet year went wrong all at once across years. And then, as if the rain wasn't enough, a cattle disease swept through and killed an enormous share of the animals people relied on. This wasn't a side issue. For a peasant, the ox was the engine of the whole farm, the thing that pulled the plough and made arable farming possible at all, and the cow was milk and cheese and a calf every year. One historian, going through the actual surviving manor records account by account, calculated that something like 62% of the cattle in England and Wales died in the moraine of 1319 and 1320, and on some estates, 11 of the ones he sampled, Every single animal was gone. Your fields drown, your seed rots, and then the ox you'd use to plough them next year dies in the byre anyway. A family could lose in the space of a few seasons the harvest, the seed for the next harvest, and the animals that would have made any future harvest possible. They weren't just hungry. They'd lost the machinery of not being hungry. The death toll was staggering and slow. Estimates run to around 10% of the population of Northern Europe, and in plenty of towns and cities the figure was far higher, a quarter of the people gone in some places. The Black Death gets all the attention, and fair enough, it killed more. But the Black Death was fast. This was years of watching the food run out, watching prices climb past anything a normal person could pay, watching the cattle die and the children die and the old people simply stop. Wheat that cost 5 shillings a quarter in good years shot up to 20, then to 40. When the price of survival multiplies by 8, the people at the bottom don't ration. They run out.
That is described inflation. It's 5 shillings to 20 shillings for wheat. So the Lord's gonna look out for his elect, man. It's not hard for the Lord to perform a great miracle once again, where you eat something and then that's enough to last you 40 days, and then you can run, and then the Lord may make you run into a bunker or something with canned goods and stuff like in the movie The Road. There's a scene in the movie where the father and son, they end up running into this very awesome bunker with all types of food in it, man. So you just never know, man. Or you might end up going in the woods and you find Bigfoot, and the Lord can have Bigfoot to throw you a big ass roastery chicken. Yeah, but this is Revelation 6. I think it's Revelation 6 and 5, or 5. When the Lamb opened the third seal, I heard the third creature say, "Come." I looked, and there was before me a black horse. Its rider was holding a pair of scales in his hand. 6. Then I heard what sounded like a voice among the flower living creatures saying, 2 pounds of wheat for a day's wages. That was a denarius. A day's wages today could be $100 for most people. What is average? I'll look this up here. In America. Yeah, I'm not asking for that. Yeah, majority of Americans earn an average daily pay of roughly $260 to $280. That's for most Americans. I actually want to say maybe like 100, but yeah, I guess it's 260, so it's gonna be
This summer.
so it's really gonna be like 260 for one bag of bread eventually, if that's estimate is correct. I actually really want to say like 100 or maybe 120, because that's really what most people might get paid is. It's all after taxes as well, so really it's like 180. Yeah, 180 I want to say. So it's really gonna cost like about 200 to pop for a bag of bread, and then another 200 for maybe 3 more bags of bread. Verse 6, and I heard what sounded like a voice among the 4 living creatures saying, 2 pounds of wheat for a day's wages, and 6 pounds of barley for a day's wages, and do not damage the oil and the wine. So it's going to cost you like 2 pounds, 6 pounds. Wow, yeah. Yeah, so it's gonna cost you like 260, double, maybe triple of what people are paying to feed themselves for a week, just to feed you, to get you through maybe 4 days, 5 days in the time to come. Going back to the video here.
The cannibalism shows up again in the same shapes as before, and that recurrence is part of what makes it credible. The same conditions keep producing the same accounts. A monk named John de Trocolo, writing at St. Albans, recorded that people were eating things no one should eat, and that men and women in many places secretly ate their own children, and even strangers. The word he uses, furtively, secretly, matters, because it tells you these people knew. Writing at St. Albans, recorded that people were eating things no one should eat, and that men and women in many places secretly ate their own children, and even strangers. The word he uses, furtively, secretly, matters, because it tells you these people knew. They weren't doing it openly. They hid it, the way you hide a thing you know is monstrous, even as you do it. And he has this awful detail about the prisons, that thieves locked up in jail would fall on newly arrested prisoners and devour them, and that they did it while the new arrivals were still half alive. Sit with the mechanics of that one for a second, because it's specific in a way that's hard to dismiss. A medieval jail wasn't a place anyone fed you well. You were often expected to pay for your own food, or rely on charity through the bars, and in a famine the charity dried up first. So the men already inside, locked in, forgotten, starving in the dark, would have been further gone than almost anyone outside. And then the door opens, and a new prisoner gets thrown in, someone arrested for stealing bread, probably, since that's what people were arrested for in a famine, and to the starving men already in that cell, he isn't a fellow prisoner, he's the first food that's come through that door in a long time. A separate chronicle from Bristol says almost exactly the same thing in its own words, that the living could scarcely bury the dead. that horse meat and dog meat were counted as good food, and that the prisoners tore newcomers apart and ate them half alive. Two different sources, two different towns, the same picture of a jail turning into something out of a nightmare, where the worst place to be sent for stealing a loaf was into a room full of men who hadn't eaten. In Ireland, during the chaos of Edward Bruce's invasion in those same years, people were reported pulling bodies out of graveyards, digging the flesh out of the skulls of the dead and eating it. The skull detail recurs across centuries and cultures, and there's a grim practicality to it, because the face and the head hold soft tissue that the rest of a long-dead body has lost, and a starving person knows where to look. And there's a small, strange, almost human-scale detail from this famine that always sticks with me. In August of 1315, the King of England himself, Edward II, stopped at the town of St. Albans on his travels, and there was simply no bread to be found for him and his entourage. The King of England, surrounded by his household and his servants and all the machinery of royal power, and nobody could produce a loaf of bread.
Now on Uber Eats, get a buy one, get one, create your own pizza from Papa John's. Order in so you can lock in for the game.
And all the machinery of royal power, and nobody could produce a loaf of bread. If the man at the very top of the whole structure, the one person in the kingdom who should never go without, can't get bread, you can do the math on what's happening to the man at the bottom, the one nobody was ever going to feed. I'll be honest with you about the limits here, the same way I was with Glaber. The famine is rock solid. The mass death is rock solid. The collapse of food prices, the cattle plague, the king with no bread, all documented from records that have nothing to do with shock value. The cannibalism is reported again and again by the chroniclers, but it lives one notch down in certainty, because chroniclers also liked the horror of it and tended to repeat the most lurid version they'd heard. So I'd put it like this. People in those years absolutely did eat the dead and probably the living in the worst hit places. Whether it was as widespread as the monks suggest, we can't fully prove. But you don't get this many independent voices describing prisoners eating each other half alive unless something genuinely monstrous was going on in those jails. Before we leave the famines behind, I want to give you a couple of smaller, sharper cases. The ones that aren't about whole regions collapsing, but about a single household making an unthinkable decision behind a closed door. Because those are in some ways the ones that haunt me more than the mass die-offs. And before that, just so the scale of it sits right with you, understand that the famines we've talked about weren't isolated freak events spaced safely centuries apart. Famine was a recurring visitor to medieval Europe, arriving every generation or two somewhere on the continent, and the cannibalism that came with the worst of them follows the same recurring shape every time, in source after source, across hundreds of years and thousands of miles. Glaber's was one of several brutal famines in the 11th century alone, and he describes more than one. The 13th and 14th centuries had their own. Eastern Europe, Russia, the Baltic, all have their famine chronicles with the same grim entries. The reason the details rhyme across all of them, the murdered traveller, the eaten child, the dug-up corpse, the man burned for selling human flesh, isn't that chroniclers were copying each other's horror stories. It's that starvation does the same thing to people everywhere, in the same order. And the people writing it down kept reaching for the same words because they kept seeing the same things. A monk in 11th century Burgundy and a townsman in 14th century Bristol didn't compare notes. They just both watched their world run out of food and watched what their neighbors became when it did, and the accounts match because the experience matched. In Abbeville, in France, in 1438, near the bitter end of the Hundred Years' War, with the country wrecked by decades of fighting and the food gone, a woman killed and dismembered 2 children, and then she did something that tells you everything about the state of mind that famine produces. She salted the bodies. She preserved them the way you'd preserve pork for the winter, packing the flesh in salt so it would keep, so that the meat would last. This wasn't a sudden frenzy or a single desperate meal. It was provision. It was planning ahead, looking at the months of starvation still to come and laying in supplies, and the supplies were children. The horror of the salt is that it's so domestic, so ordinary, a normal preserving technique any medieval housewife would know, applied to the most abnormal thing imaginable. And there's a later one, slightly past our window, but worth it because a witness wrote it down in detail at the siege of Sancerre in France in the 1570s. A Protestant town under siege, the food gone, and a man named Jean de Léry, who was inside the town and survived to write about it, recorded coming upon the dismembered body of a little girl, around 3 years old, with parts of her already in a cooking pot over the fire and other parts, it appeared, already eaten by her own parents. Léry was not a man who shocked easily. He'd travelled to Brazil years earlier and written about cannibalism among peoples there with a fair amount of composure. But finding it in a French town among his own people, a 3-year-old in a pot broke something in his careful traveller's detachment, and the passage where he describes it is one of the rawest in all of his work. The cannibal you can write about calmly is always the one far away. The one in the next house over is different. While we're in this stretch of history, Scotland gives us a figure who sits right on the line between the famine and the legend, and he's worth a few minutes precisely because of where he sits. His name comes down to us as Christy Cleek, and the real name attached to him is Andrew Christie, supposedly a butcher from Perth who, during the Scottish famine of the 1340s, took to the hills and became something far worse than a butcher. The story goes that as the famine ground on, Christie and a group of equally desperate people were starving up in the Grampian Highlands, and Christie did what a butcher does, which was use his tools on whatever flesh was available. He took a long pole with an iron hook on the end, the sort of thing you'd use to haul a carcass. The sort of thing you'd use to haul a carcass, called a cleek, and he'd hide near the mountain roads and hook riders right off their horses as they passed, drag them down, kill them, and eat them, horse and rider both. The cleek is where the name comes from, Christie of the Hook. He's supposed to have killed around 30 travellers this way before things got too hot, slipped away, and, in the version that makes the whole thing feel almost like a bad joke, ended up living out his days as a respectable, prosperous merchant down in Dumfries. The monster retires comfortable. The earliest written trace of this is real enough. A Scottish chronicler named Andrew of Wintown, writing in the early 1400s, mentions a figure he calls Chuston Cleek, who set traps and killed children, women and men, and ate them all. And the famine itself behind the story is documented. The 1340s were genuinely terrible in Scotland. Floods and cattle disease and reports of plagues of mice and rats overrunning the land. So there's a real famine, a real early reference, and a name that shows up within living memory of the supposed events, more than a lot of these legends can claim. But the full tale, the 30 victims, the iron hook, the comfortable retirement in Dumfries, that gets richer and more detailed in the retelling over centuries, the way folklore always does. Treat the famine as fact, treat the existence of some grim local horror as plausible, and treat the polished story as something that grew a little in the dark. The hook and the comfortable retirement are good storytelling. They are not quite history. And since we've wandered into the territory of cannibal legends, let me get the most famous one out of the way right now, because if I don't mention him, the comments will, and because separating him from the real cases is part of the job. Sawney Bean. If you've heard one medieval cannibal story, it's probably this one. Sawney Bean, the head of a clan of inbred cave dwellers somewhere on the wild Scottish coast.
So that's the point on that Shalom.